Hello, and welcome to this series of conversations about ancient Greek philosophies and modern ways of life. My name is Michael Griffin, and I'm coming to you from the University of British Columbia's Vancouver Point Grey campus. This campus is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. I'd like to acknowledge where we are at the very beginning. I'd also like to invite you joining us from far and wide to take a moment to acknowledge and reflect on the traditional ownership and caretakers of the land where you are today. I was delighted today to have a chance to talk with Levonne Abshire, my colleague here at the University of BC. Levonne is health promotion strategist at UBC. In addition, she's co-chair for the Thrive initiative at the university. Thrive aims to support all of our well-being, mental, physical, as a whole person. And there's a lot of territory that we cover in the conversation connected with that theme. So as you'll see, we discuss, for example, the importance of an equity and diversity lens in talking about well-being and mental health. We talk a little bit about the importance of taking ourselves as whole people, mental, emotional, and embodied, and not just as atoms, but as people really connected with our communities and able to support each other. You'll also see that we talk about the Thrive 5 Plus, how sort of specific practices connecting with our well-being and supporting us are shifting and adapting each year to take account of new needs. And some practical suggestions like if we just feel like we've got 5 minutes to do something for ourselves or our friends to reach out today, what are some of the best things we can do while acknowledging that we're all different and it makes sense to learn for ourselves. So thank you so much to Levonne for taking time to join us, and I hope you enjoy the conversation as well.
My name is Levonne Abshire. I'm a health promotion strategist with Health Promotion and Education. So a lot of my work is student facing. It sits with under the Vice President Student Office. And in my role, I get to think about health and well-being for the student community and more broadly working with staff and faculty and how they think about their own well-being, but also in support of student well-being, whether that's through advising or if they're in enrollment services or if they're faculty, how can they think about the whole student and the student well-being in their pedagogy and in their curriculum.
That's wonderful. So you really kind of touch on almost every aspect of the university community through this lens of student well-being.
Yeah, I think the university's approach to well-being is really one that is a systems level approach, more socio-ecological and thinking about how it's all interconnected and that we can't just think about student well-being or staff and faculty well-being and that, each is connected and impacts the other. So that's why when we think about a campaign like Thrive, we really want to make sure that we're addressing the entire campus community, staff, students, faculty, and even those who are just living on our campus for residents. So really being mindful of the fact that there are so many interconnections that impact and support our well-being.
That makes perfect sense. And as I guess that's a good opportunity to think about Thrive. We have this program called Thrive at UBC, which we're heading into as we record this now at the tail end of October in as we go into November 2020. This seems like such a valuable idea this year. And I wonder if maybe you could tell us a bit about Thrive, what the goals of the program are this year, and maybe after that, what inspires you to help guide the project, because I know you're co-chair for Thrive too.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that and acknowledging that. I am the co-chair of Thrive, and Thrive is really this month-long campaign to promote mental health awareness and mental health literacy. So mental health literacy is a construct in which we really want for individuals to think about access to information, health information, as well as an understanding of the health information and how to put that into action. So what we're really hoping is to build some skills for our community, and that's for students, staff, and faculty around mental health literacy. The emphasis of mental health literacy is really how can people promote and support their mental health? What are those different ways that individuals can do that? Another thing that we think about is around being able to distinguish between a mental health disorder and maybe a mental health challenge. What's normalized stress and what's something where I might need more support from a medical practitioner. And then how do we reduce stigma? There's a lot of stigma attached to having a mental health disorder, or even, thinking that you might need some support with a mental health challenge. So how do we reduce some of that stigma as a community so that individuals can get the help that they need? And then finally, really building on some help seeking skills. And so that's like inviting students, staff, faculty to really think about the times when they do need help, and understanding that, asking for help isn't necessarily a sign of weakness, and that it's something important in order to really take care of oneself. So Thrive this year has really focused on mental health literacy. And in addition to that, we've really focused on that first tenet of how do we promote and support our mental health. And there are various ways that we're hoping people will explore that through the month of Thrive and beyond.
That's wonderful. And it seems like such essential work right now. And thinking about how big a project that is, as well as how valuable, I wonder if you could say a bit about how you come to it. What inspires you to take this kind of leadership role in guiding this project forward?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I would say, as a professional, I'm an educator, by heart. That's my education, that's my experience. And so for me, it's how do we build these literacy skills? How do we build the health literacy skills for individuals so that they feel confident enough and competent enough to really take care of themselves? When we think about research, it's been proven that having health literacy will improve health outcomes for an individual. In addition to that, it really does reduce the inequities when we think about, health services. So the idea of being literate, being able to understand how to read information to support one's mental health and well-being, it is really important. Being able to understand and access resources to support one's mental health is also really important. And it can be somewhat of, it creates this equity amongst people if we can have those same sort of skills as it relates to really understanding how to support one's health. So that's the professional, in me speaking. The heart in me is just really thinking about, our community, especially now, and that these are challenging times. It's hard for everyone. It's hard for students, it's hard for staff, it's hard for faculty. I think we're all experiencing the challenges, and I think Thrive is an opportunity for us to acknowledge that there are some universal challenges that we're all experiencing, and that, no one is really excused, from the pandemic. We have these universal challenges, as I mentioned. So I really think Thrive can really bring the community together. In addition to that, I think it's really highlighted that there are certain systems and structures that really do impact, certain people who are part of marginalized communities that are greatly more impacted, and their mental health is greatly more impacted by some of these systems and structures. And I think Thrive this year is really looking at more diverse perspectives around mental health. And even then is really looking at taking some advocacy and activism in thinking about how do we support individuals who are living in more marginalized communities based on their identity.
That's beautiful to hear. And it seems like there's a real sort of thread running through all of that of how knowledge is empowering in a way. So in expanding literacy and understanding, there's also this wonderful kind of equity, inclusivity lens that it sounds like it's just growing and thriving with Thrive every year.
Yeah, I think that's our hope. And I think more so this year, I think the pandemic has brought that to light, as well as, recent events, whether it's across the border or has just really brought up some of the, the systemic racism that exists in our communities. And I think Thrive is an opportunity for us to acknowledge that and to create some space for dialogue around that. We spent a lot of time, I think, during the last few years with Thrive, really building up self-efficacy and really hoping to build the skills for individuals to take care of themselves. And I think this year there's this opportunity to think more broadly about supporting each other's community and how we can advocate and activate for others.
That's great to hear. I know I don't know very much about this, but I've definitely heard that there can be a sort of that it's important to balance that kind of self-efficacy lens that also connects me with some things in Greek philosophy that we talk about
Mm.
with recognizing that we don't all have the same access to resources. We're not all coming from the same place. So it's really important to look at it both ways.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. And I think, yeah, it does need to be that balance of acknowledging that. I love the metaphor, the analogy of a backpack. You know, we're all
Uh,
carrying this backpack, and we do have some of these similar skills and similar resources that are available to us. And I really think mental health literacy allows for having all, you know, having some of those same skills. But we do know that there are others who have some of those heavier rocks
uh,
that they're carrying in their backpack. And so what can we do as a community to sort of relieve some of those bigger rocks, whether that's racism, whether that's intolerance, you know, discrimination towards other, you know, other parts of one's identity.
that's a really helpful metaphor. I agree. Thank you.
Thanks.
I I wonder if we're thinking about the sort of the practical aspect of Thrive. There's this phrase I've seen around the Thrive Five, and
Mm.
it sounds like that's a really nice kind of memorable way of thinking of what we can do on and off campus, I guess. I wonder if you could just take us through that. What is the Thrive Five?
Sure. So, you know, in thinking about the principles of Thrive, we really wanted it to be grounded in research, you know, in evidence informed in research. And so, when thinking about how do individuals promote and support their mental health, we really looked at the research. And so, what really came up for us was the Thrive Five, which is moving more. So, thinking about physical activity and how does that support one's mental health. The idea of eating well, as well as good sleep hygiene, you know, thinking about what does that mean and how does that really impact one's mental health. And the two other lifestyle factors is social connection, this idea of belonging and really being connected to others, and then helping others. So what does helping others or showing gratitude or being grateful do for one's mental health? So in a nutshell, those are your Thrive Five. This year, we've really expanded it by thinking about Thrive 5 Plus in alignment with more diverse perspectives and understandings, and acknowledging that one's spirituality and faith, you know, might contribute to one's mental health. You know, art and culture and music, how does that impact one's mental health? Mindfulness, and even, you know, advocacy and being a part of this an advocacy movement, you know, how does that one support one's mental health? So we've added the plus there, Thrive 5 Plus. And as far as ways to engage, we have the Thrive calendar, which is on our Thrive website. You could just Google Thrive UBC, and there's a calendar of events that not only just address physical activity and good sleep hygiene, but you also see opportunities to really think about advocacy, whether that's through climate change and climate anxiety, or thinking about anti-racism and microaggressions and learning more about that. So lots of different ways for our campus community to explore their mental health.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Um, this is a bit of a sort of a tangent, but since part of what we've been thinking about in some of my courses this year is ancient Greek philosophy, I wanted to go there and ask you a connected question. Um, so in Greek philosophy, we've talked about the idea of eudaimonia, or on one interpretation, the sort of flourishing as a whole person. And I guess, as for example, Plato argues, this means balancing the needs of our body, our kind of appetites and our embodied needs with our heart and emotional life and with our mental life. And I feel like you've touched on this already, but I'm wondering how that lines up for you with the framework of Thrive, trying to find a sort of balance between our embodied emotional and mental lives, especially in this university context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think for Thrive and our understanding of mental health and well-being is, you know, mental health is part of one's well-being. And when we think of well-being, we're thinking about the holistic individual, the whole person, and knowing that there are so many different components of one's life that impact and influence one's well-being, whether that could be, you know, financial wellness, whether that's, you know, one's profession and meaning and purpose, which is all connected to that heart, and potentially even one's head. So we really do want for Thrive to be about the whole person, And we acknowledge that, that mental health has a place and an importance within, science as well as the medical profession, which is so important. And when we think about the balance, is this importance to think about a more humanistic perspective, a more person-centered perspective, really believing that individuals have it within themselves to discover and determine, what's most important for their health and well-being. So in addition to the balance of heart, mind, body, is this idea of how do we balance science and medical profession with a more humanistic, person-centered idea of believing that people have it and the potential within them to really support their mental health and well-being.
That's wonderful. So yeah, sort of speaking to us as whole persons as much as possible.
Yeah, yeah. And I think in
Um,
addition to that,
no,
would
go.
just
Yes.
be, extending that to the community,
Mm,
and one's connection to community and how that also impacts one's health and well-being, is their ability to find purpose and belonging within community, but also to contribute to that as a way of feeling well and maintaining one's health and well-being.
that we're not kind of atoms, but we're really interconnected, and we can only understand ourselves in dialogue, maybe.
Yeah, that's such a great
Yeah.
metaphor. I like that. Mm-hmm.
Thinking about, I guess, some of the challenges that Thrive is responsive to. I wonder if maybe you could tell us a bit about what you think the challenges are, especially that you've noticed or heard about, or just that you're awake to in guiding the program that, students, faculty, staff, all of us might face when we are trying to flourish as whole people. I mean, both this year especially, but in general.
Yeah, I'll speak to this year in particular, and I would say the pandemic has really brought to light isolation and a lack of
Mm,
social connection and feelings of loneliness. Anecdotally, I've heard that from students, but I've also heard it from staff and faculty. And so for Thrive, I think it's where there are opportunities to bring people together, to help people to feel like they belong. And I think some of the events that are online can do that. I also think social media can do that through our Instagram at UBC Wellbeing. I think there's a way there to connect people. So I think loneliness and isolation has definitely been a challenge during this pandemic. In addition to that, I think motivation and stamina right now, I think we're 9 months in now into the pandemic, and the novelty, I guess, per se, is wearing thin, and I think
mm,
people, are feeling less motivated. And so, what are ways in which we can motivate individuals but bring back hope? And
uh,
so, is there a way for Thrive to bring hope? And I think an even greater challenge is thinking about specific groups of individuals who might be more greater challenged based on the intersections of their identity. Like I think
mm,
about specific groups like student parents who are navigating, the issues of having to find childcare perhaps, or, school for their children, and trying to complete a master's or a PhD, and still trying to live amongst some of the affordability issues, in Vancouver. And here we have this pandemic. So I think it's also thinking about the intersections at play for different groups of people, and how can we provide more specialized support to those individuals.
that's really helpful to hear. And for people who are maybe for those reasons, especially, and the students as well, who might be feeling especially stressed right now, are there any sort of particular contact points you'd encourage, or just kind of ways of looking at that experience that you'd encourage?
Yeah, so I think part of it is this normalization of some of those feelings, and that people are not alone. And when I use the word normalization, it's more of a sense of how can you feel like you're more part of a community, in knowing that others too are experiencing similar challenges. So I think there's that, and being able to share that and feeling okay and having the courage to say that you know I'm experiencing some challenges right now, and or I'm lonely right now, and that
Mm,
takes a lot of courage. But you know, I think the more people who share that and are able to communicate that, I actually think that brings people closer together.
uh,
So I think that that's one way, is being courageous, you know, and acknowledging when you do need support, is one. And I also think like understanding what resources are available to you. So if you're a student, being able to log on to students.ubc.ca health, and using a navigation tool that can help, you know, a student identify, depending on where they're living, depending on what type of support they need, can really help identify what type of resource that they need. In addition to that, like reaching out for help, you know,
mm.
there's no shame in asking for help. If anything, I think it requires a lot of courage to ask for help when you truly need it.
That's a really moving way of putting that. That makes a lot of sense. And also, I thought you were sort of touching on the sense that the more of us are willing to do that, then the more it creates a sort of a space or contributes to a space where we all can feel more comfortable and hopefully courageous that way.
Yeah, yeah. I think it just takes a few of us to, you know,
Mm,
start that sort of courageous domino effect of just
uh,
really being honest, and you know, and being courageous about asking for help, because there is so much help out there. There's so many resources available to students, staff, and faculty, and sometimes it's hard to navigate. But there are people on campus who are navigators who can help you do that. We have wellness center navigators that can help students navigate the systems that are available to them.
that's great to hear. I guess my last question, Levonne, from this side was for people who might be feeling right now just so busy and stressed out that it's hard to kind of, imagine doing anything that takes more than 5 minutes. And it's probably not true, but for those who might feel that way, I know I do sometimes. Um, is there anything you would suggest that we can try to do if we just like, I'm going to take 5 minutes for myself? What could we do with that time to just kind of help ourselves out a bit?
Yeah, you know, I'm going to say that I don't think there's necessarily one answer, and I think people need to explore different ways. But I usually start off with slowing down the breath. You know, if you do have a minute or two to take 5 deep breaths and think about a 5-second inhale and a 5-second out exhale, and doing that
Mm,
5 times. You
mm,
know, it brings your attention to a focus point in the counting and in your breath. It slows down the rest of your, you know, physiological, you know, symptoms, such as your breathing, such as your heart rate. And when we think about the stress response, our heart rate tends to go up, our breathing tends to speed up. So there's this ability, you know, through 5 deep breaths, counting, you know, 5 seconds inhale, 5 seconds exhale, you know, is a really good place to start. And then I would say, and this is, you know, this is my preference, is to go outside, even if
mm.
it's just opening up the window and taking in some deep breaths of fresh air, stepping outside for a 5-minute walk, and coming back in. There's lots of evidence and research around being outside and how that contributes to one's health and well-being is really important.
That's really helpful and hopefully something many of us will have access to at least one and hopefully more of those options.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad that you brought up access. And I think that's also important to think about, because, you know, when we mention the Thrive Five, being physically active or eating well, we have to acknowledge that not everyone has the same access, whether it's to, you know, a gym or equipment or different types of foods. So, you know, if there are ways in which we can also be considerate, you know, of our diverse populations, that's also really important. So thanks for bringing that up.
Thanks so much, Levon. So that's all the questions that I had. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we close today?
I'd just like to say there are so many resources available, on campus to support student health, staff and faculty health and well-being. To take a look to see what's most important to you. And I really think it's important to be courageous, to acknowledge when you're struggling and to ask for help when you need it. And it's take the time to pause, even if it's just that really slow inhale exhale to just bring down the heart rate, bring down the breathing. It is something really simple that I think could be really helpful.
Levonne Abshire, thank you so much for taking time with us today.
Great, thanks for having me.
Nos sons es